Once we had been flying for a couple of hours, I realized that the man sitting 5 rows in front of me was looking at me. I admit that it might have been paranoia because I was exhausted, and flying makes me anxious, and the prospect of sitting in coach for 10 hours fidgety and restless, desperate for something I could fixate on. But the man sitting 5 seats down the aisle was making me nervous, and I couldn't brush that feeling aside. I don't know, I just had a bad feeling the moment I saw him. He had already been seated when I came into the plane, dragging my carry-on behind me as per usual. God, I fucking detest airplanes. I was stuck in the narrow corridor waiting for the guy in front of me to stop struggling with his oversized luggage inside the overhead compartment, his wife cursing angrily at him in quick Spanish. I looked away, trying to keep my irritation under control. This was going to be a long flight, but it would feel longer if I couldn't keep calm. That was when I met the man's eyes. I couldn't begin to describe them. He had one of those normal faces, nothing remarkable or memorable about it. Plain brown hair, plain brown eyes, not too thin, not too fat. I don't even think I could easily pick him out of a lineup. I couldn't even tell if he looked sad or happy, just very plain. Despite myself, I just smiled a little bit. We are all travelers in pain, aren't we? He didn't smile back. The guy in front of me cursed again and started trying to shove his carry-on luggage under the seat in front of him. I watched him for a while, and when I looked around again, the unremarkable man was looking at me. Same blank expression as before, except for the smallest wrinkle in between his brows. The only indication of any kind of thought of feeling. It was impossible to read his face, but I couldn't help but think that I had piqued his interest. It was a relief when I was finally allowed to move along, leaving the man behind. I found my seat, stored my bag above my head and my purse under the seat before me, then put on my headphones and tried not to think too much about how I couldn't stop a plane from crashing, or how much I hated when things were out of my control. Having the aisle seat, I could see the man, his fingers drumming the armrest as people poured into the plane, in between bodies and luggage. I think I caught a glimpse of him turning his face around, trying to get a glimpse of me, but he didn't do it again once the plane took off. I guess it's difficult to be a creep when you're trapped in a flying metal box. I did see him glance my way once, but after that, he started fumbling with his phone, so he might be distracted. I couldn't tell where he was from. That was a direct flight from Toronto to São Paulo, so most of the passengers were Brazilian tourists or immigrants, such as myself, going back to visit their friends and family. The guy didn't look like anything, so he could be Brazilian, I suppose, or Canadian. There are some pretty weird types in Toronto. Maybe, I told myself as I watched him fumble with the phone, maybe he is just a nervous passenger, like myself, someone who hates flying just as much as I do and is just heading to a Brazilian beach to escape a harsh Canadian winter. And that was when I realized his phone was off. He'd had it out for at least an hour, tilting the screen one way or another, but the screen was pitch black. He didn't have headphones or AirPods on, and he surely wasn't playing a game. He wasn't even watching a movie. For the last hour, he had been using his phone as a mirror to look at me. Somehow, I was his in-flight entertainment. Don't look worried, I told myself. Looking worried would make me look weak, and I didn't want him to think of me as an easy target. I sat there for a moment, my heartbeat picking up pace as I considered my options. Most people will tell you to call attention to a creep that is making you uncomfortable. And I would usually agree, but this wasn't some gross drunk asshole on the subway trying to put a hand under my skirt. I wasn't entirely sure the guy was doing anything, and the last thing I wanted was to be the hysterical woman making a scene. Discreetly, I grabbed my purse and walked towards the washroom in the back of the plane, but I didn't go. Instead, I looked in the galley for a flight attendant. "Is there a way to change seats?" I asked him. He looked mildly annoyed because this was a busy flight, and there weren't many unoccupied seats. Once I explained the reason, though, his eyebrows shot up. "The guy on 26H?" I was a little relieved. If he had noticed, then maybe I wasn't being as paranoid as I thought. Yeah, that one. He looked in that direction, mild annoyance turning into impatience. Then he said, "I think there's an empty seat in the back of the plane." I thanked him and took my seat in the last row. The turbulence was going to make me nauseous, but at least I would feel safer with some distance between me and that creep. I settled in, had my shitty airplane dinner, listened to a few episodes of a funny podcast on my phone, and slowly felt myself relax. I even managed to fall asleep. Sometime later, I cracked my eyes open again and... shit, fuck! My heart felt as it was going to leap out of my mouth. He was staring at me again, except this time, he wasn't even trying to be discreet. He was just standing there, on the other side of the aisle, looking at me over the sleeping heads of the other passengers. Maybe it would have been wiser to pretend that I was asleep, but I didn't want him to think he could intimidate me, so I loudly asked, "Do you need something?" with enough volume and indignation that I attracted the attention of a couple of passengers. I saw the sympathetic flight attendant walk towards him. The man didn't even flinch. His eyes still on mine. He smiled. It was the first hint of any emotion that I had seen on his face, and I didn't like it. He looked smug, as if he knew a secret that I hadn't figured out yet. Before the flight attendant could say anything, the man turned and walked away. The flight attendant was kind enough to ask if I wanted to move again, but I didn't think it would make much of a difference. One of the perks of flying is that there is nowhere to run, but there was also nothing the man could do to me. It was another 4 hours before we landed, and until then, the man didn't bother me, nor did I leave my seat. I wasn't about to risk it. Once we landed, I waited for everyone else to leave the plane so that I could keep an eye out for him. From the back of the plane, I managed to catch a glimpse of his orange shirt as he left, but he didn't look back once. Once I knew that he was gone and the aisles were finally clear of other passengers, I thanked the flight attendant and went back to my original seat to fetch my carry-on luggage. I wasn't in a hurry to catch my connection, which would depart in 3 hours, but the Guarulhos International Airport is one of the least reliable airports I have ever seen. Once I got my luggage, I would have to go through customs, then check my luggage again, then rush to the other side of the airport to catch a domestic flight, all of which should take me at least 1 hour, if not more, depending on how many people were flying. I was worried about all of that, but all of those worries faded away because I realized something while taking my carry-on from the overhead compartment. The tag was missing. The tag with my full name, phone number, and address. Everything that a person would need if they wanted to find me. That was 3 weeks ago, and I'm about to get on the flight back to Toronto. But I don't know what I'm going to do once I get there. I'm scared of going home.
I live in a small town. You blink and you miss it. The best we can boast about is a single stop sign and a gas station, which we only have because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is 25 minutes away. So, when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal. They're often drifting through. Drug addicts run rampant and will steal everything they can from your house, but it's the normal out here. However, what happened a few years ago certainly wasn't normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room, but it was summertime and not much I could do. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. Next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a shitty set of blinds. Part of the blinds are broken from wear and tear, and the crappy AC output beneath it would make them move back and forth, so you'd get a glimpse outside every so often. The yard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline at my window. The figure of someone was directly at my window, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. I didn't have an imagination as a child. That had been trained out of me, but the sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head and slept in a cloth oven that night. By morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mum's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what happened. She laughed at me like I was an idiot and told me it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I almost believed her since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something didn't sit right. Later that day, when we were doing yard work, I glanced over at my window and saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed it out to my mum, who proceeded to chew me out. "That's how the cat probably got up there, moron. Stop leaving furniture everywhere." But I hadn't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it. So we moved it back, and so began a pattern. At night, I'd see the figure, complain to my mum, and we'd find a chair moved back every single morning. This went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until, one morning, we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember her shaking her head and complaining about those damn stray cats that we had still yet to see. I could tell she was unnerved by that development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in our living room that night. The only problem was our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there were always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until about 4 days later we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I'd woken up until it happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost like someone was shining a flashlight in. I saw it trace along the walls and land on the love seat across from the couch I was on. I was mortified. When I told my mum, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window. He slept in the recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside the window anyways. It seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of habitual fear and watched through the window across from the bed. Everything seemed normal as time drug on, and I felt like a moron. Maybe my mum was right. That was until I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he'd been here plenty of times before. I still remember the large build the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived here and wasn't creeping around my yard in the dead of the night. I just remember listening to the TV until I fell asleep again, hoping to get another glimpse. My dad would have been pissed if I'd woken him up. He was grumpy on a good day and terrifying on a bad day. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof, because I was scared. The next morning, my mum chewed me out again for the patio furniture, which was routine almost a month later. But this time, something new happened. She demanded I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlights, etc. It wasn't me. I begged with my mum and pleaded with her. Just stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my arse beaten for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad. Finally, she agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mum did, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked into our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was a sound of someone placing metal tools down on the brick steps as if they were trying to be quiet, but couldn't fully muffle it. She whispered for me to go wake my dad. My dad was angry, having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out from the back door towards the front of the house. where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming and someone dropping tools, then the shot of a gun twice. The frantic footsteps pounding out of the garage felt like they were coming from my chest. My mum peeked out the window, then opened the door, and my dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but told us that there was a man crouching at our front door, looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning, the law from the closest town arrived. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, for a description of the man, and then told us to install cameras. That was it. They said the guy was probably just looking for something else to steal for quick money. If that had been the case, why hadn't he stolen the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles just sitting in the garage? We finally set up hunting trail cameras around the house, but nothing has happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about the incident years later when I sleep in my own bed. I don't know what he was looking for, or why he did the things he did. Whatever the case may be, man at the window, let's not meet.
I'm currently 21 and female, and this happened to me about 6 years ago when I was 15 years old. I live in a relatively small town where everyone knows everyone. For reference, there were about 120 kids in my graduating class in high school. The town is so small and there's not a lot of ground to cover, so it wasn't unusual for parents to let their teenagers wander around outside with their friends. My friend from a different town had come over to my house because we were going to see my school's musical later that night. We decided to go wander around outside until it was time to go. She was from a different town, so she was unfamiliar with the area. I suggested we go down to my local train tracks because there's this cool cliff or overpass type thing where you can sit and watch the river. I had been to the train tracks with my friends many times before, and people my age used to hang out there all the time. This was sometime in early March, so it was still quite cold where I lived. Even though it was chilly, I remember distinctly that I wore flip-flops for some reason. This will be important later. The train tracks intersected a street in my town, which was quite close to my house. So this is where we entered the tracks. We were walking and spotted a middle-aged man who was alone and on the phone. We thought nothing of it and kept walking. We made it to the overpass and were sitting there, just hanging out, when we noticed the man we had passed earlier was slowly inching closer and closer. We both noticed this, but decided not to panic, since it's possible he was just slowly making his way down the tracks. Maybe 5 minutes had passed, and the man was getting increasingly closer and closer to us. At this point, we noticed that he's getting closer to us at an alarming rate. He's not continuously in motion. It's more like we noticed him standing still, doing whatever. And then a minute later, he's standing still even closer to us than he was prior. Now, he's close enough that we can clearly make him out. He's within earshot and could easily get to us if that was his goal. My friend and I are starting to get nervous. We're two teenage girls in the middle of essentially the woods and no one around us other than this creepy man. I've watched a lot of investigation Discovery in my day, so I think it's best to just try to promptly make my way out of there without creating chaos. I decided it would be a good idea to pull out my phone and pretend to talk to my mother as we begin walking back to the main road. My friend and I are calmly walking down the tracks while I have the phone up to my ear. I'm saying things like, "Yeah, we're at the tracks, we're on our way home." Just making shit up, so this guy thinks my mom is aware of my exact location. There is a point where we have to walk directly past the man in order to make it to our destination. It's at this point where he opens his mouth and says clear as day, "I know you're not on the phone." At this point, my fight or flight kicks in, and I'm terrified. Up until this moment, the creepy man had not directly said or done anything to make us think he was a direct threat. The situation was uncomfortable enough that my friend and I thought we better head out. When the man said those words to me, I quickly realized that the perceived threat was both real and dangerous. As soon as my brain registered what he said, My friend and I both ran for our lives. I was never one to enjoy physical activity, let alone running, but I could have won an Olympic medal that day. I ran so fast that my flip-flop broke and ended up running barefoot on the gravel that lined the tracks. I was so scared that if I looked back, I would see him running after me. So I didn't. When I finally began running out of steam, I quickly looked back and saw the man standing right where we had left him. He didn't run after us, but I couldn't shake the fear of turning around and seeing him chasing me. When we finally made it to the main road, I quickly called my mom and told her what happened. She was conveniently driving down the exact road we were on and pulled up about 2 minutes later and took us home. My friend and I have never been so scared in our lives. I haven't been on those tracks since, and to this day, I still think about the man who knew I wasn't on the phone and what his intentions were that day.
I've had a few scary encounters in my life. Not sure if that means that I'm old or just a creep magnet, but this one still creeps me out. In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else just ever happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors because random family members were always coming by for this or that. One night while we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling because bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I'm female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was a thin, little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night, so the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went looking for you. Again, all of the lights are off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that, 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it, and 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could hide in the living room with a coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face as if he's trying to peer in and looks exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavyset, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw, but then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out and "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. Creepster was still there, but no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking toward the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let Creepster know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and to lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly. Then I remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben in a very calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear and Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw Creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line and it wouldn't work, whether from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street would actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun, and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming. But he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was definitely no police involvement though. We just went on with our trip, but we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. Edit. I just talked to Ben. First, he doesn't have an account, but is so pleased that everyone thinks he handled himself well. Second, he said the story was pretty spot on to how he remembers it, but that the guy at the back door, when we talked about it before, I thought he didn't remember that part, so I was confused on that. He said that as I was locking the side door, we saw Creepster moving around to the back of the house, so Ben told me to hurry and lock the sliding glass door. Those doors are right around the corner from each other, so I was closest. According to Ben, and this is what I thought happened, but I didn't want to say it unless I was positive. As soon as I flipped the lock on the back door, the guy was standing there, just looking in at me. I stood there for a couple of beats looking at him, and that's when Ben told me to close the curtain. We also saw him in the front yard one more time after that. I remembered this all along, but wanted to check with Ben to make sure he also remembered it before I added it in. It was a large front yard with a long gravel driveway. Off to one side of the driveway, quite a ways from the house, was a spot where my cousins parked cars they were working on. I know, so stereotypical. While we were on watch, we saw Creepster messing with one of the cars. It was actually Kyle's. When he couldn't get it started, he walked into the woods that ran beside the house. We didn't see him again after that.
This story is told from the perspective of a man. This incident happened just a few hours earlier, and I'm typing this story currently at my workplace. I work in the garden area of a home improvement store. I don't work the cash registers, and my manager doesn't even let me water the flowers, so a lot of the time I have nothing to do. This results in me taking extremely long bathroom breaks, where I just scroll on my phone. I know it sounds bad, but it's better than standing around trying to look busy. Today was the same as any other, with me wasting time in the bathroom. Nothing of interest happened until my work phone buzzed at the same time as the stool next to mine. This becomes important later. A few seconds later, I see that the guy in the next stall had his hand stretched to the ground with his palm facing up. I at first thought he had run out of toilet paper and was asking for mine. He just stayed silent for a while, so I ignored him after that. Then he started moving that hand uncomfortably close to my leg, so I immediately scooted away and prepared to leave. Once the man noticed that, he hurriedly got out his stool before I could leave. Another few seconds of silence. I took a peek out from the gap of the stall door to see what the hell he was doing, and just like a scene from a horror movie, our eyes connected. He was barely an inch away from my door, trying to peek inside. My blood ran cold. If you are wondering why I didn't immediately open the door and cuss the guy out, I really hate confrontation. I avoid it whenever possible, and I do my best not to draw attention to myself. I stood sideways by the door, so he wouldn't be able to see me. That's when the whispering started. I don't know what the first thing he said was, but it sounded like moaning. The next part was a bit more audible. He said something along the lines of wanting to see more of my unflushed toilet paper. I was thoroughly disgusted. This guy was a complete creep, and I was alone in the bathroom with him. My heart was beating faster by the second. I know I had to stay there until another person came into the bathroom. No way was I going to confront him alone. Probably a minute later, someone finally arrives, and I take this as my chance to wash my hands and get the hell out of there. Thankfully, the presence of the other person made the old man quit his creepy behavior. As I was about to leave, he blocked my path for a quick second before stepping aside. The weird thing was, I don't even think he works at the store because he wasn't wearing any vest. My store is extremely lenient about uniform, but most workers at least wear a vest or something connected to the store. He just looked like a regular customer. I'm certain I heard 2 phone dings echo in that bathroom. The phones have a signature ring to them, so it couldn't have been a coincidence. Either way, he only started creeping on me once the phone ring made it clear that I was an employee. The situation really creeped me out, and I've been totally unfocused on my work since then. I kept prowling the garden area to look out for any old man wearing a similar outfit to the creeper. I have an incredibly hard time distinguishing faces, so I probably wouldn't even recognize him, even if I did see him. Creepy bathroom peeper, let's not meet again. I want to preface this story by stating that I've had my fair share of encounters with creepy men. This situation, however, scared the life out of me. It's the first time I genuinely felt like my life was in danger. My husband and I had to drive 17 hours last week to North Carolina for a wedding. It was an exhausting week, and we basically spent the entire time rushing from one family gathering to another. We were staying in a motel for the time we were there. We had already been at this motel for a few days by the time the day of the actual wedding rolled around. The day of the wedding was hectic. We were rushing around trying to get ready to leave for the venue. My husband got ready before me so he could do some last-minute things before we had to leave. That left me alone in our motel room to get ready before he returned. It was brutally hot outside, and I decided to do my hair and makeup in just my underwear, so I wouldn't be sweating in my nice dress the whole time. The way this motel was laid out, the sink/mirror were in the general open area of the room, with the toilet and shower in another room. So anyone walking by our room window could see me standing at the mirror. However, I did have the curtains closed, but these curtains were a little bit sheer, so you could technically see the shadow of someone walking by on the outside, or could maybe see the silhouette of me inside the room. I was curling my hair in the mirror when I noticed the silhouette of a man walking by my room window. As he's passing my window, I see him stop and start trying to look into my window. At first, I thought it was my husband trying to see if I was ready, so I paid no mind to it. But the longer the guy stood there, bobbing his head around, trying to get a better look through the curtains, I began to realize it was not my husband. Because obviously, why wouldn't he just come in? Now I'm starting to get a little freaked out. Before I could do anything though, I watch as this guy starts to go for my room door. My utter shock and horror came when he actually was able to open the door and walked inside. Before my husband left, he forgot to pull the door shut all the way till it clicked into its lock. He was very upset at himself when I told him this later. So now I am face to face with this man, and I'm in my underwear no less, who's at least 6 foot tall and standing in my room. I thought to myself, this is it. He's going to attack you. That's a very scary realization to have. I also thought to myself, you're going to have to burn his eye sockets out with this curling iron if you want to survive. For a few seconds, probably only a second or two, but it felt a lot longer, he just stood there staring at me like I was a piece of meat and he was starving, ready to pounce on me like prey. He then began to smile the most evil-looking, toothy grin I've ever seen, and started mumbling something under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying completely, but I did make out the words, "pretty lady," and "come here." I don't know if it was the fight or flight response, but I suddenly got pissed, and I charged towards him, ready to strike him with my hot curling iron. I screamed as loud as I could, "Get the fuck out of here!" It must have startled him because he jumped back out onto the balcony of the motel. I saw this as my chance, and I ran for the door. I luckily was able to get to the door and slam it shut right before he was about to make his second attempt at entering inside. I immediately collapsed on the floor sobbing. I literally was too scared to move from that spot until my husband came back about 15 minutes later. I told him the whole thing and he was freaked out. He initially wanted to find the guy so he could beat the shit out of him, but I refused to let him leave my side. He must have apologized 1,000 times during the rest of our trip for not making sure that the door was locked before leaving. But I told him that the day and that whole trip really was so rushed, I could see how it happened. We went to the motel management and told them the whole story. The police were obviously called, and I gave them a description of the guy so they could see if it was someone who was staying in the motel. After going around to the few motel occupants, they said no one matched his description and concluded he wasn't staying there. Obviously, we were late to the wedding that day, and the whole experience just ruined what should have been a happy time. We planned on staying another day before our long drive home, but we both just wanted out of there as soon as possible. We skipped most of the reception, went back to the motel, packed up and left. I'm usually always so vigilant with locking my doors, especially when I'm home alone. Just goes to show you, all it takes is that one time you forget to check your locks, and that certain unwanted guest is inviting themselves in.
So this happened about an hour or two ago, and I'm pretty freaked out. I'm a 24-year-old female, so I have a Wi-Fi enabled baby monitor in my bedroom so I can watch my son when he's sleeping and in his bassinet while my husband and I are downstairs. I tend to be nude in my bedroom in the second story of my house as I don't have central air, and it's summer in Wisconsin. Today is currently over 80 degrees. I was laying in bed, drinking a beer and watching TV, when I noticed the light blinking on the baby monitor, which was currently facing towards the bed, as my son had been in a co-sleeper on the bed with my husband last night, since I work night shifts in the hospital. For our monitor, a light blinking on it means that someone is watching via a website or app for the monitor. I jokingly sent a text to my husband, he is at work at this time, calling him a creeper, and I was flipping off the camera and talking to it. but I found it odd that it took him several minutes to read my message. When he responded, I could say the cliche that my blood ran cold, but that would be embellishing. He said he hadn't opened the app in the camera in weeks, and he definitely wasn't the one watching, and advised me that I should unplug the camera, which I did. I don't know who was watching me, or how they could have got the login information for the monitor, but creepy person watching me through the baby monitor. Let's never meet again.
I was about 20 or 21 at the time this incident took place. I was a female university student, but I commuted to my campus, so I lived at home. A good friend of mine went to the same school, so we stayed close into our adulthood. She had recently started working out at a branch of a popular chain of gyms that was nearby, and she asked me to be her gym buddy. I was more than happy to, and I started joining her. Whenever we went, we had our little routine: weights, cardio, and then to the pool. This gym had a great pool for laps, but of course you had to shower before you got in, especially after working up a sweat doing other exercises. The locker room connected the main section of the complex to the pool area, and it had little cubicles to shower off in. We used these showers all the time without a second thought. The building had been around for a long time. Before it was this particular gym, it was another gym from a different company, and so on. The place wasn't exactly modern or renovated, and in some areas, the showers in particular, it was pretty dilapidated. Some of the tiles were cracked or had fallen off completely. One day, the stall I was in was missing tiles all around the handles, but I didn't pay attention to it. I figured it was only pipework back there. But that day, I got an odd feeling. So I bent down to look through the hole in the shower wall. Lo and behold, there was a pair of eyes staring straight at me. I could tell it was a man, maybe middle-aged. Even staring directly at him, having caught him peeping, he stared right on. He never looked away. His gaze animalistic and intent. The hole went straight through to another room, presumably the showers in the men's locker room. I turned the shower head so that I could hide in the corner and finish up out of his line of sight, and I promptly reported it to the staff. They went looking for him in the men's locker room, but never found the culprit. I jogged my memory, trying to recall if any particular person had been watching me in the gym that day, but it could have been any one of dozen or so men I casually walked out next to. In the same room, none the wiser. Within only a couple of days, the staff had patched up all the shower walls. I'm glad it won't happen to any other unsuspecting girls there, but shower peeper? Let's not meet.
A few years ago, I moved to a relatively remote part of my town with my boyfriend. We owned a small section of the land behind our home, which consisted of the woods, a creek, and general shrubbery. I'd take my dogs out there every day for walks, and one day came across what looked like a campsite where a homeless person would live. There was a basket full of sticks and what I assumed was being used for firewood, a mattress, blankets, and tarps. It looked relatively kept, so I assumed someone must be actively staying there. I went off in a different direction and decided to stay away from that area. I had told my boyfriend about what I came across that day, and we were trying to figure out what we should do to eventually remove this person, as this was our land, and we didn't feel comfortable having someone camping out so close to our home. We sort of forgot about it for a few months, until one day I was walking past the area again with the dogs, and curiosity got the best of me. So I went to have a snoop. Once again, I found the same layout, though much more unkempt. There were some leftover food items and the remainder of a fire. I quickly left. The same night, as I was waiting for my boyfriend to get home, I was in the kitchen cooking and facing the window that looked out towards the woods. I thought I had seen someone standing next to a tree, but it was so dark and I have horrible eyesight, so I didn't try to overthink it. But then I actually started thinking, our home and property was fenced, and that little campsite I saw again today, I freaked myself out. Could it be the person that was staying there? I knew someone probably was, but I didn't think they'd want to show themselves, if that makes sense. I carried on cooking and thinking on it, hyping myself up in a bad way. I kept looking around but couldn't see anyone, so I hoped it was just anxiety and my overthinking. And then there was a knock at the back door. We had a curtain covering the window on the back door, so I couldn't see who was knocking, and I wouldn't be able to see from the window where I was standing either. I went to the door and moved the curtain. No one was there. The dogs had started barking at that point, which if you have dogs you know that when you feel anxious, them barking can freak you out even more. I had my Alexa playing music and turned her off to be able to hear better. The dogs were barking in the front room at the windows, but I couldn't see anything. I shut the curtains fully then and calmed the dogs down, but I was feeling very, very uneasy. Suddenly a noise came from the kitchen, like someone was jumping against the door. The dogs started going crazy again and ran to the kitchen. I went after them. The door kept jittering and moving. Someone was trying to get in. The pole that was keeping up the curtain fell and I saw a man wearing what looked like a white face mask, some sort of cover to conceal his face. He kept pushing on the door and I was hyperventilating at that point. If I left out the front door, he could run and get to me in seconds, so I left the dogs downstairs and ran upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. I felt so scared. I was scared for my dogs. I called the police as I could hear the back door keep being hit and the dogs barking so loudly. I remember how I haven't even been able to tell the police my address before the noises stopped, and I could just hear the barking, but no more bashing sounds. I was momentarily convinced he had gotten in, but surely I'd be able to hear some sort of struggle as my dogs were two large German shepherds. Yet there was nothing I could hear. The police did arrive very soon. My back door was still intact. I spoke to them through the bathroom window as I was scared to come down before they assessed the house from the outside. And I had to calm the dogs down before I let the police in, as the dogs were very riled up then. I told the police about the homeless person who lived in the woods. They had a look in the area and couldn't seem to find anyone or anything suspicious. That was until a few weeks later when myself and my partner, along with the dogs, walked down to that campsite again to see if it had been abandoned or not, on the slim chance that they did have something to do with the break-in. And we found this. The white mask that I spoke about before, how I couldn't tell what it was. It's hanging on the tree. Gloves and boots were hidden in a bag which we found by the creek, soaking wet. Apparently, all this wasn't there when the police went down there that night. Though the campsite, for the first time, definitely looked abandoned. We sent pictures to the police, who came down again soon after. But even though they had all this evidence, safe to say nothing was ever done about it, most likely as there was no successful break-in. We got everything removed from the campsite and taken away in a skip. Who knows what would have happened if the back door gave in? I still worry thinking about it. It's left me with a lot more unresolved anxiety than I already had.
So, I'm in my early 20s and female. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago. I haven't had much to do with any of my neighbors. I've always been slightly uneasy to the fact that no one around here is looking out for me. If anything seems off, no one would notice or do any investigating to make sure I'm alright. Last year, I noticed a man constantly walking his dog in the grass area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see. It's a common area for residents here. His dog is super cute, and my cat liked to play with it through the glass door out back. They would just chase each other back and forth and put their paws up to the glass and such. Real cute stuff. Well, one day I was outside, and his dog came running up to my porch with glee to get pets and say hi to his kitty friend. This is the first time I actually spoke to this neighbor. We'll call him Mark. So Mark seemed decent enough, and we got along just fine. We started hanging out pretty often in a short time period, because I'm a smoker and he was letting his dog out all the time. And it was summer, so we ran into each other quite often, and would spend an hour or more after work most days talking. This lasted for a couple of weeks. I gave him my phone number and was happy to have a friend in my complex. I will say, he was clearly very interested in either having a romantic relationship with me, or at least being butt buddies. He said this quite a lot. Not butt buddies, but you get what I'm saying. I was very honest with him that I wasn't interested in either at all, and had to tell him this quite often. Frankly, I was getting rather irritated that this came up several times every time we spoke. He rather quickly was trying to get me in his house. From the first time we talked until the last, He offered multiple times every time I saw him. I always said no and blamed it on me being COVID cautious. He quickly got tired of that excuse and invited himself to my home as well. I always said no. One day he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, saying I had to try this stuff because it's delicious. I instantly noticed that the seal is broken, screw cap bottle, but doesn't seem like anything was drank. The bottle was filled to the brim, which I also thought was a little odd because usually wine isn't filled to the tippy top like that. So he pours a couple of glasses and doesn't drop a beat in telling me to take a drink. I felt very uncomfortable, but didn't want him to feel like he was being accused of anything when he's just trying to be a nice, friendly neighbor. After all, he poured himself a glass of this very same stuff, right? Well, my mama still raised me better than that, so I totally faked a sip and said it was good. After any sentence either of us said, he would again tell me to take a drink. I told him I don't really drink, so I'm pacing myself, but did say that I noticed he hadn't drank any, and to please go ahead. He didn't reach for his glass right away, but in the middle of speaking, he reached for his cup and knocked it over, spilling the wine into the grass. He brushed it off rather quickly and told me it's my turn to drink now. I said, but you still haven't drank anything. You spilled your drink. Pour yourself another glass. I don't want to drink alone. So he did. He still didn't drink anything. He did tell me a few moments later to drink mine. I told him that he needs to catch up, and we basically just kept doing that in circles. He reached for his glass again, and guess what? Spilled it again. Wine's all in the grass now. Then he told me to drink. At this point, I'm done. Too many red flags are screaming at me to get the hell out. I'm honest with him that this seemed really sketchy, and I didn't trust the drink because he's refusing to drink any, but is way too eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and taking it slow because he doesn't drink a lot, but he's seen me have friends over taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he knows I'll handle it better than him. Yet another red flag is raised. So he's been watching me, huh? I think it's important to mention that our complex is huge. He used to work here and knows the maintenance crew, and he doesn't live particularly near me. He's about half a block away from me and cannot see my windows or yard from where he lives, and has a few different common area yards closer to him that he could use for his dog. So I told him that I'm flat out not drinking anything because of how all this seemed. He once again pours himself a glass and once again spills it. There isn't much left in the bottle at this point. I pour the remaining wine in his glass and tell him to drink with me on 3. We raise our glasses. To my amazement, he actually takes a drink, and I spilled mine into the grass. Oops. He comes out about 2 nights later while I was smoking and instantly starts complaining to me that I wouldn't date him or have sex with him, and he doesn't know why all girls are like this. He starts getting really loud, shouting at me asking what the problem with him is, that I won't do these things. I told him that I'd been honest with him since I had met him that I'm not interested in that, and that it isn't him specifically. I'm just honestly not interested in that from anyone right now. He still shouted at me and started complaining about his ex and her dog. Yes, her dog. Then proceeded to tell me that he used to abuse the shit out of that dog, and went into detail about how he wouldn't feed or water it because it used the bathroom in the house, and how he would kick it really hard. I'm horrified at this point, especially considering this whole time he's telling me this, he's playing fetch with his little dog. His dog always seems scared of him, and I'd even pointed that out in the past, and he said that his dog's previous owners were abusive, so he's just very scared and distrusting. The dog was always very excited to see me though, and would cuddle up with me and stay by me, so I always thought I was extra special. But with that knowledge, I just think the poor guy is currently in an abusive household. I was so done with this guy that I just cut him off and said I needed to go because my friends were waiting on me. He sent me several messages of gibberish when he's outside. He'll just blow my phone up with, hey, hi, Jajeb, Jajeb, Jack, LOL, my name, hi, it'll just keep going. He's texted me telling me that he knows I'm home because he's seen me walking around, that he sees my car a lot. He'll throw his dog toys on my porch, I think trying to get my attention to come out because of the cute dog. He'll just stand outside my porch for hours. It's all cold and rainy and snowy these days, so it's even creepier. I think in his mind, since I'm a smoker, I'll come out eventually. Silly him though, because I just go out front when I see him out there. He said several things to me before the wine fiasco went down that were red flags. I figured it might be a language or cultural differences though, because English is the 3rd language he's learned, and America is the 3rd country he's lived in. I guess moral of the story is to just trust your gut. He's still bothering me, and like I'd said, we only spoke and hung out for a few weeks in summer of 2020. My last message from him was last night. He asked me what he had done wrong, and if I felt disrespected in any way. I've not spoken to him since he screamed at me for not sleeping with him, sandwiched with admitting horrible animal abuse. I thought about answering his text with the brutal truth about how twisted and creepy he presented himself as, and how uncomfortable he made me feel, but I didn't want to give him any ideas on how he should improve. Stay smart, folks. Don't drink things people give you if the seal is broken. He was definitely trying to drug me. To everyone telling me to move, I really appreciate the concern for my safety. I'd love to move since I've become uneasy in my own home environment, but moving is expensive and not something I can afford at the moment. I also do have a stun gun, pepper spray, and handgun. I'm extremely reluctant to ever use a gun on a person, but I do have training on the weapon. I do bring the pepper spray with me every time I go outside now, even if it's just to take garbage out or pop in my car for a second.
I live in a city with a public transportation system. They have been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays, during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they are short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a lift, and this nice, older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married, and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend time with family. He then says, I'd marry you in a heartbeat. Again, I'm just thinking he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things I needed for work. When we stopped, he said he was joking and that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning, he texts me and asks if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure and he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then, about an hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said okay, see you at 3. He shows up at 3 and lets me know he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I opened the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before, and that he'd love to spend time with me, and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but I know when you're in a situation like that with a predator, playing nice is safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, see you tomorrow. That evening at work, I check my phone after a bust happy hour, and he's texted me a couple times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mum and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me, telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying, please stop. Friday morning, the shit hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and I want a divorce. I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said, I'm picking you up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer. I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. Around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and beg to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but was too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filled a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to report through lift, so I did. Haven't heard anything since then, but the shit was just creepy as fuck. This happened years ago, but still affects me to this day. The summer after I graduated high school, I was still living at home. I was up late once night and was packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot and had the window open as I sat and folded clothes. It was around 2 in the morning, and the next thing I knew, there was a hand coming through the gap in the screen of my window. I screamed and the hand flew back out. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if it was my younger brother pranking me. I got up and looked out the window and just saw the figure of a man staring back at me. I ran into my brother's room, and he was there playing video games. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors, and left. We were all still shaken up, and my mum had a feeling that he would come back. It turns out her mother's intuition was right. She went outside and waited on our back porch. After 20 minutes or so, she saw a man, dressed in black, slink into our backyard along the tree line. There wasn't a fence on that side, unfortunately. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds and ran to another tree and hid there, slowly working his way towards my window. My mother yelled something to him and he took off running. The police came back out and again found no trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains. My parents installed some motion detecting lights, and that seemed to be the end of that. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment downtown together. We were really excited as this was our first place on our own. The apartment wasn't exactly the best quality, but it was so fun to be living in the city. The downside was that it was street parking only. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken, but a single rose sat on the passenger's seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to park close to the entrance, near the lights, but often it was difficult to get to those spots, and I would often have to park further away on darker streets. Things quickly began escalating at this point. My car was broken into at least once a week. Most of the time, a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground, but once a pair of men's underwear was left, and even more creepily, once a bag of Tootsie Rolls, as they were my favourite candy. This made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started to become suspicious of everyone. There was a laundry in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that finished drying. As I started to fold, I realised all of my undergarments, bras and panties, were gone. Another week, I had a male friend over from school, and his tyres got slashed during the visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. The letter described a love for me that had been going on for years. He noted things that proved he had been watching me closely. I was able to arrange for another friend to take over my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the other side of the city. It was a secured building and had an underground parking garage that was only accessible to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. For one, they met on MySpace after he reached out to her. Another reason was that new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good looking, and while Ashley was a wonderful person, she just wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I thought he was weird and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, leering smile. It was difficult to carry on any sort of a conversation with him because he would always make it weird with some random facts that were completely unrelated to what we were talking about. I had deleted my MySpace when the initial stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information was vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage her from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so strange. She would immediately get defensive and would shut the conversation down. Matt started to spend more time at the apartment, and I found myself finding any excuse I could to avoid coming home. One day, I came home from work and found Matt on my couch, alone, drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work, and she told him he could just hang out. I was furious because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer and a snack and headed off to my room and shut the door. About 30 minutes or so, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and get to know each other better because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided that maybe I needed to give it a try. He put on a movie, and I tried to just focus on the movie because I didn't want to talk. At one point, I glanced over to Matt and he was staring at me with a smile on his face. I snapped a "what?" at him, and he just continued smiling and said, "I just can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked. He said nothing and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the interaction had every hair standing up on my body. I excused myself and locked the door to my room. Another month or so went on, and I had managed to avoid being home for much anything beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there, and had even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but was beginning to look for other options. On their 6th-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table, and an already opened card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the weirdo wrote to her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without even reading the words he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one my stalker had sent. I had kept them as evidence and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique and identical. Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on the way, I called Ashley and asked her to come over. She was at work, but said she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message even though the cops told her not to say anything, and he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt or anyone matching his resemblance at the place he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met a friend of his because he said they had a falling out because he was choosing to spend so much time with Ashley. It was all lies, and in the end, she was dating a stranger. We don't even know if Matt was his real name. The cherry on the top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when we disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through everything. There was a duffel bag that was full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments, there were about 10 pictures of me. All were taken from far away, with the exception of one of me sleeping. The sheets were current, so I know it had to have been at the current apartment, before I started locking my bedroom door. A few pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which made us think that was him as well. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think of what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with my red lipstick marks, a necklace I hadn't even noticed missing, a few other random sick souvenirs. The police never tracked him down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete psycho. I think I had some underlying anger, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his endgame was. Would he have tried to hurt me? Or was he simply content with being in my world? I'll never know. Being stalked changes you. Even when I lived across the world, I looked over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I'm married with children and know that he moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I'm tense and keep a low profile. Part of me will always worry that Matt will resurface again.
I have several let's not meet stories rolling around in my head. I think today I'm ready to tell the story of my stalker. To preface this, I know there are a lot worse stalker stories out there, and mine might be pretty mild, but it still terrified me and haunts me today, nearly 10 years later. It was my first real full-time job after college. I went to school for art, but the job was basically an admin, along with a bunch of random responsibilities. At least once a week, I worked in the warehouse counting and organizing inventory. A coworker of mine started hanging around and seemed like he wanted to be friends. He was very helpful with the job, having been there for a while and knowing the ins and outs of the company. His name was Tim. He was 46, lived in his mom's basement, had never been married. He had a cat he talked about often, and claimed he used to be a Hell's Angel. He drove 18-wheelers and thought they were super cool. He started offering to smoke me out on lunch breaks, which I would accept, because duh. Then he started buying me lunch, stating, "My friend did this for me when I was your age. I'm just paying it forward. One day you can help someone else when you have the money to spend on them." He knew all the local places to eat and would choose a place, suggesting what I should try. It was a mistake to ever accept anything from him, but I'm a foodie, and he introduced me to things like Cuban espresso and burger buffets, adding excitement to my otherwise monotonous workday. Around that time, our friend's cat had several kittens. One of them was a beautiful tortie, Penny, that I knew Tim would love. So I fostered her for a bit until he decided he wanted her, and he came over to pick her up. She got along with his other cat and was super sweet. He loved her and would send me pictures of her and them together all the time. We had him over, my boyfriend and I, a few times over a period of about a year. He told the same stories over and over again, but we tolerated him because we thought he was lonely. I made him a dating profile because he often spoke about how he wants to meet the one, etc., but he rejected every single woman he matched with. He would pick their appearance apart, on beautiful women who were in his age group, even some much younger. Now, when I say Tim is an unattractive man, please trust. He was gross, overweight, sweaty, had thick, coarse black hair and a huge gap in his incisors that he would suck spit through after he laughed, licking his teeth. He had giant pores and moles, and he was just old. We did have many conversations, but I started to get the creepy vibes. For my birthday that year, he bought me a first edition of my favorite book. After I had told him this story about how I lost my mass-produced copy, I had exchanged favorite books with a friend who ended up losing my favorite book. Her book was Twilight, which I hated. He also bought me a necklace that was for cancer survivors, which was very sweet, but also kinda really personal and awkward, but still seemed innocent enough. He would show up with a case of beer, knocking on the door unexpectedly. We tried to be hospitable, but it started getting annoying. However, I felt bad for him, and he was always so overly nice and helpful at work, I felt bad turning him away. One day after we had lunch, while sitting in his truck in our work parking lot, he told me he thought I was the one. I reminded him about my boyfriend, and he said, "No, he's not right for you. You're supposed to be with me." "No, Tim, you know I care about you as a friend, but I'm not interested in anything with you like that. You're making me very uncomfortable. I love you. I can take care of you. Think of all I can do for you. I have this much money in savings. Please, stop. This is getting weird. I don't like you like that at all. Please, drop it." I got out of the truck and shut the door. The storm was brewing. After he confessed his love for me, I told my husband, then boyfriend, everything. He had warned me, and he reminded me how he called it. How he always knew this would happen, that Tim's creepy, that I shouldn't have accepted all the food and gifts, etc. He was totally right, and I felt sick. I started putting distance between Tim and I, while still being kind and sociable at work. I told my husband everything. Tim would call me over and over again, even though I always ignored his call. Until one night, we got sick of it, and I answered the phone and told him to stop calling me. He was crying and begging me to talk to him. My boyfriend took the phone and told him to fuck off and hung up. That's when the threats started. He would leave voicemails about how he couldn't stand to look at Penny, and about how he was going to take her in the woods and kill her. Or he could just let her free. She would be eaten by wild animals since she was still so small. He said she reminded him of me, that he hated her as much as he hated me, that he wanted to bash her brains in. I started to call into work sick. I didn't want to see him. He ignored me deliberately, which I appreciated. He wouldn't look at me, but acted normal besides his sudden coldness towards me. Seeing him was awful. I ended up getting laid off. Tim had other coworkers try to contact me on his behalf, people reaching out telling me I need to call him, that he's hurt by my sudden leaving. I would get calls from random phone numbers in my area and it would be Tim. I would hang up as soon as I heard him say hello. I changed my phone number. We moved across the country. It was maybe a year later. He somehow found my new number and called again, leaving this huge voicemail. He said he had found the one, but also he was dying. I can't remember how or why he was dying. It's all hazy now, but he needed this innovative technology or surgery that happened to be only available in my town, in my state 1,000 miles away from where he lived, and we worked together a year before. And he wanted to meet up. It was all such a coincidence, and he was so excited to catch up and introduce me to his pregnant fiancée. He also needed my address. At this time, I was pregnant with my first and only child. Tim said his fiancée was pregnant too, that we would be parents at the same time. At that moment, I blocked every single person I had ever known from that town on Facebook. Every single person that knew Tim, that he could have gotten information from. I changed my phone number again. The nightmare started, of him showing up in the middle of the night, having somehow found us. Of him carrying a case of beer, banging on the door, sucking spit through his teeth. I felt like he wanted to find me, so he could get back at me somehow. Looking back, he was a total incel. I don't know if any of his story was true, or what his plans were. Anyways, F this dude. Currently experiencing something similar at my current gym, which reminded me of Brett. I am a male. When I was around 19, I got really into weightlifting at my university's rec center. It was a massive complex with multiple weight rooms, 2 indoor tracks, an Olympic swimming pool, the works. I'd lift 4 to 5 times a week and often cool off with laps in the pool. One day in the weight room, I was approached by a guy named Brett. He didn't look like a student. He was older, probably late 30s, early 40s, but very friendly. The rec center wasn't just for students. Anyone could purchase a membership. Casual conversation is pretty common in gyms, and I was so naive in those days, I didn't think anything of it when he asked personal questions, like where I was from and where I worked, which was at a grocery store in my hometown, the next town over. I didn't see this guy in the gym every day, but it was common to run into him a couple times a week. We'd shoot the shit for a bit, and I began to sense that he was interested in more than just saying hi. One day, he mentioned that he'd been by the grocery store where I worked, but didn't see me there, and wanted to know what my schedule was. Despite my naivete, I immediately recognized that this wasn't normal, and that I didn't want to talk to this guy anymore. I lied and told him my schedule was different every week, and got back to my workout. One day, not long after, I was walking into work to start my shift. We started at 9 a.m., and he was there in the foyer just hanging around. He called out and tried to talk to me, but I told him, "Hey man, I'm at work right now." After that, I didn't really talk to him in the gym anymore. Looking for me at my job was too weird, and it pissed me off. He'd approach me and I'd just coldly say hey and look away. The final straw was one evening when I'd just finished swimming laps. The shower room was an open room with 4 shower stands, each with 4 nozzles pointing north, east, south, and west, so 4 people could use the same stand at once. No curtains, no partitions, which may seem odd these days, but I never thought anything of it since I grew up swimming at this pool. I was in there alone showering, my swim trunks hanging on the drying rack, when I glanced toward the doorway to the locker area and saw this motherfucker peeking around the doorway watching me shower. He immediately ducked back and was gone by the time I finished up and went to get dressed. I went straight to the service counter to report what had happened. I only knew his first name, but they seemed to know who I was talking about. Never saw him again after that.
When I was a kid, growing up in a very small town in the 80s and 90s, my parents often left me and my little sister home alone for a few hours at a time to run errands. My mom had 2 brothers, and we lived in the same town as one of her brothers and his family. Being a close-knit family, my cousins and I were always over at each other's houses. The adults would leave us alone a lot. Back then, it was standard to tell kids, don't open the doors for anybody and don't use the stove, and we never thought anything about it. After my parents divorced, it happened more often as both my parents worked different shifts at their jobs. My sister and I lived in town, and my cousins and my grandma lived outside of town with only a few neighbors nearby. So my sister and I got the best of both worlds, city kids and country kids. Because we lived in such a small community, everyone knew everyone else, and I think we all felt perfectly safe that nothing bad would ever happen, and if it did, our neighbors would help us. Around the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I began to get strange phone calls. It would be a man's voice on the phone, and these calls would almost always come when I was home alone. This person would tell me they could see me, that they knew I was alone, and that they were coming to get me. When I'd get these calls, I'd usually just hang up without saying anything. Of course, it terrified me, but I was too scared to tell my parents. I was scared by the calls, but I also liked getting to stay home alone. Being left to take care of my sister made me feel grown, and I didn't want my parents to stop leaving me in charge. Stupidly, I kept the calls to myself. One day while my dad was at work, my cousin, who was a year older than me, was at my house. We were watching TV and playing when the phone rang. She answered it, and her face went pale. She hung up and started crying. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she shook her head saying, "I can't tell you." I pressed, and she finally told me about how this man would call her a lot when she was home alone, always telling her he knew she was by herself and that he was going to come get her. I was shocked. I explained that I had been getting the same calls, and we immediately agreed that it had to be one of her older brothers or their friends playing a mean joke on us. We calmed down and kinda laughed it off. I didn't get a call for another while after that, so I almost forgot about it. In the summer between my 6th and 7th grade year, my grandma had taken a part-time job, and my mom lived in another town, so my sister and I were home alone all day, every day, while my dad worked. We spent our days outside playing in the yard, riding bikes around the neighborhood, and tanning in our backyard a lot. One day my sister was gone to a friend's, and my cousin was back at my house. We were listening to music and dancing around the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up, and there it was, the voice. At this point, I was 12 years old, and I had developed a little bit of an attitude. When the man told me he knew we were home alone, I laughed and said, "Liar." He waited a moment and said, "I can prove that I know you're alone." I laughed again, a little more nervously this time, and said, "Oh yeah? Then do it." His response was, "I love that little yellow tank top you're wearing today." By this time, my cousin had turned off the music and was watching me, so she saw when the color drained out of my face. I was freaking out. I had just gotten a new outfit and was wearing it, a yellow tank top and jean shorts with matching yellow and pink patches. I yelled, "Leave us alone," and slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I started crying and told my cousin it was him. He knows we're here by ourselves. I ran over to shut the living room curtains, and my cousin said, "I think we should call somebody." I agreed, but instead of calling the police, she picked up the phone and tried to call her mom at work. We got no answer. I called my dad's work and left a message with the gate guard to have him call me. As we were debating what to do next, I heard the gravel in our driveway crunch under the wheels of a vehicle. I ran to the window and peeked outside to see a small red car sitting in the driveway. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't recognize the man and woman inside it. In our tiny little town, even if you didn't know someone's name, I'd surely know their face, but I didn't know either one of them. I froze with fear as I watched them talking to each other, and my cousin ran to lock the back door. We had no weapons, and no real way to try to defend ourselves other than my softball bat, which was outside on the carport. As my cousin came back into the room, she hissed, "We have to hide." My cousin hid in a small space between a tall bookshelf and the wall, and I threw myself behind our recliner, which faced the window. I watched in horror as the woman walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she tried the knob. I tried to quiet my breathing, convinced she might be able to hear me, and watched her shadow through the curtains as she walked around to our carport. Sure enough, I heard the doorknob jiggle. There was a pause, and then the door shook as if someone was trying to force it open. I covered my mouth and forced myself not to scream. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped and everything went quiet. I was too afraid to move, so I just waited. I have no idea how much time passed, but eventually we heard the car backing out of the driveway. Once I got the courage, I ran to peek out the window again to make sure they had really left. I saw no trace of the red car, but I was still racked with fear. I told my cousin she could come out, and we hugged each other in relief. Even though we were scared to go outside, we decided to get on our bikes and ride to the office my aunt worked in. Once we were there, we told her everything, the phone calls and how long they'd been happening, the red car, and the description of both people inside. She immediately called the police, and we had to give our statements about it all. When my dad got home from work, he asked me why I'd called the gate guard, and my aunt filled him in on everything. And from that moment on, we weren't allowed to stay by ourselves again until I was probably 16. We never heard anything else on the case, and we also never got any more phone calls again. It's been years, and I still think about the situation often. We never found out who made those calls, or who those people in the red car were. The phone calls could have just been some mean prank, and those people could have just been simply trying to rob the house or something, but the coincidence that day was crazy. I have no idea if the man kept watching us as we grew up, but the whole thing definitely made me paranoid about a lot of things, and I always make sure to keep a weapon near me at all times when home alone. Now, as a single mom, I am forced to leave my kids alone occasionally, and I am overly protective with them, giving tons of instructions and rules about what they can and can't do. They may roll their eyes at me, but I know the dangers of the world, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. So, to the man and the couple in the red car, let's not ever, ever meet. Let me share a story about the time my mother and I discovered a homeless man living in our cottage basement. This was in February of this year, 2021. We have a cottage about 45 minutes away from my parents' main home. It's not too far from Huntsville, Muskoka, Ontario, if anyone wants a visual. Thing is, it's completely unfinished. The basement has no proper flooring and has a slight water leak right now, so there are plenty of fans and a dehumidifier running. As a result, one of us needs to check on the place at least once every 2 to 3 weeks to empty the dehumidifier in the basement and make sure everything is okay. To describe the house layout a bit, the entrance to the basement is directly in front of the main entrance. It's a long, skinny staircase with a low roof, so you need to crouch on the way down. There is one crappy light bulb in the ceiling, so it's always super dark down there. There's one big room, then 2 hallways branching off. One hallway leads to a bedroom, and the other leads to not only a second bedroom, but also a washroom, all of which are completely unfinished and without lighting. The second hallway is much longer, and the rooms are just way off in the back corner of the basement and are completely dark. In other words, it's creepy looking. Okay, so let's get to the good part. The day it all went down. My mom and I are headed up there to empty the dehumidifier, have some lunch, and clean out some junk. We're slowly gutting the place. It had been nearly 3 weeks since we'd checked up on the place by this point. We stopped at a McDonald's beforehand and each got a filet-of-fish combo. First time trying one, and it was actually pretty tasty. We get into the place and put our food on the table, then turn the heat on. The first thing we do is run downstairs to turn the water on and check the dehumidifier. After turning on the water, we head over to the dehumidifier and notice that there is hardly any water in it. It looks like it's only been running for a couple of days. There is still the regular amount of moisture on the ground, but it was strangely empty. My mom and I head upstairs and she grabs her phone to text my dad and asks if he had stopped by to empty the dehumidifier recently. He said he hadn't. We were both puzzled as to why it looked so empty, but never considered there was a third person in the house with us. After heating up our food, we both sit down at the table and turn on the TV. About 5 minutes into our meal, we hear a massive bang downstairs. Almost as if someone stubbed their toe really badly on a cupboard or something like that. We instantly jump and look at one another with a freaked out look on our faces. The TV is still playing rather quietly. Then we hear the worst thing. We hear a small grunt downstairs. It was unmistakable, a human vocal sound. My mom whispers to me, "Was that a person?" And I smirk and nod my head, yes. Although it was freaky at the moment, I wasn't really taking it very seriously for some reason. Looking back, this was pretty serious and this person could have been very dangerous. I just told her, "Grab your jacket and let's head out to the car and call the police." We gather our stuff and I grab a kitchen knife on the way. If you'll recall, the entrance to the basement is directly across from the main entrance to the house. So, I had to make this peek around the corner and was fully expecting to see a person on the dark staircase, but luckily, it was just a series of stairs down into the dark abyss. Once we're out front, we jump in my car and she calls the cops immediately. Within 3 minutes, 4 cruisers show up and 5 cops get out. We told them what had happened and they headed down the driveway. They were in the house for probably 10 minutes before the door opened. A couple of cops walked out and boom, the third cop brought out a short, chubby guy with long black hair and pop bottle glasses. They brought him out handcuffed onto the front steps, and another cop had a bag that looked like his belongings. We were in our car, which was up the street a bit and facing away from the entrance of the cottage, but my mom turned away as soon as he was brought up the driveway. She didn't want to get a good look at him as the whole situation was pretty unsettling for her. They loaded him in the back of one of the cruisers and took him away. One cop came over and spoke with my mom for a bit about the situation. Ultimately, my parents had decided not to press charges against the guy when it was all said and done. He was just sleeping on the cold cement ground with a small roll-out mattress, even though there was a proper bed upstairs. This made us think that he'd been down that back hallway in the unfinished bedroom for a while. We probably walked downstairs to empty the dehumidifier and turn on/off the hot water a number of times, and he was like 15 feet away in one of the bedrooms. He probably wasn't a bad person, and I'm personally, at least, a little bit thankful he decided to empty the dehumidifier. Hopefully, he lived in there for most of the colder months this past winter. We're just lucky it didn't turn into one of those crazy squatting situations.
I was around 16 at the time of this happening. Firstly, I'd like to explain what type of person I am, so my actions make a bit of sense. I'm an average-looking girl, a bit overweight, which, for my country, makes me really undesirable. For this reason, I'm not used to males hitting on me, or even considered it a possible occurrence back then. You can say that I'm usually the man in our group. You know, the girl that looks after every other friend when they're drinking, and if a guy's being rude or harassing someone, I'm the one to shut him down. I don't know why I took on this role, probably because my friends are way too naive and nice. Well, I'm like that to strangers when I'm alone. I always try to be helpful to people if they look confused or ask me for directions or anything else. On this particular night, I was going home from school. My high school is in the city center and I take the bus home. Since the buses get overcrowded during peak hours, and I really hate being in between crowds of people, I normally wait around 30 minutes to an hour to catch the bus. This night, I walked to another bus stop, around 5 stops before the one to my school. so I can kill time and take an empty bus. It was dark, and I was the only one on that stop. I usually don't have a problem with going out alone late at night, as I don't have the men, bad, assault mentality drilled into me. So I'm just minding my own business when this 45 to 50-year-old man comes up to me. He has a very friendly face and a smile, so I don't think anything of it. He asks me something, and then I realize he's Turkish. I tell him I don't understand, so he uses basic Bulgarian words he knows, and I somehow understand that he's just asking for directions. Of course, I try my best to explain, and after I feel like he understood, I expect him to just stop talking to me. No, he sat disturbingly close to me and started talking to me, again in Turkish. I try to be polite and politely ignore him as best as I can, while nodding my head with a smile, looking at the timetable. For some reason, this guy starts asking me for my phone number. At this moment, I realize that this was definitely not only a lost foreigner. I try to shut him down by saying I don't have a phone. Don't ask why I thought that's gonna work. I finally gave in and tell him a random phone number. He says something else to me again in Turkish, and then the worst thing happens. All this time I'm looking at the 1 minute the bus will be coming in. I'm praying for him to please not try to call the number. Well, he does, and he shows me and asks why my phone isn't ringing. My stomach just flipped. I tried to think of something fast. Then I remembered that I have my old Motorola in my bag. I usually brought it to school to give it to teachers who collected phones during class. Also liked playing games on it. In 2014, yeah. Fortunately, the battery was dead, so I just pretended that this is the reason the call isn't going through. I see this guy try to argue, but at this moment the bus comes and I get on. I sit on the seat behind the driver as always. After 10 minutes I get this weird feeling. I don't know what it was, but I felt watched. So I looked around, but since I'm in the front seat I can't exactly see everything. Luckily, our buses have this gigantic mirror on the inside that shows the whole bus. I look into that and I can clearly see him. He's sitting on the last seat, his legs clearly visible. I start to panic. I'm still not sure he's following me, but I'm also a very cautious person, so I can't really ignore this. I start checking for him at every stop and he's still there. I get paranoid and I say fuck it and get off the bus. The stop was at our local mall, and luckily it worked till 10 p.m. I decided to go in, and if he follows, then I'll try to sneak out. He follows all right. You have to understand that in my town, almost nobody goes out after 9 p.m., so the mall is close to empty. I look around, thinking of ways to disappear on him, but there's just no way. The mall is an open space. There are 3 floors, all almost empty. I'd be easily spotted anywhere. Now you'll probably say you should have asked the security for help. No, in Bulgaria we don't do that. That literally never even went through my mind. The security is just some grandpa that walks around all day. They don't actually do work or anything. If it were today, I might not be as stupid, but back then this wasn't even an option in my head. And besides, the security wasn't even around. So, I do the most logical thing I can do, and I decide to utilize the knowledge I had acquired in the previous week. You see, the mall had a cool corridor system behind the stores. It was completely unmarked by any signs, and if you didn't know where you're going, you'd probably get lost, because it's just endless white corridors that lead to empty rooms for storage or some other stuff. Well, me, being an avid anime fan, loved going around these corridors and pretending I'm a ninja from Naruto on a mission. 16-year-olds, am I right? So I can proudly say that I learned the right path to the back stairway of the mall. Because I was smart and obsessed with the idea of being a spy, I decided to lure this creepy guy in the corridors and then just go out from the back end of the mall. I firstly entered H&M and pretended to look around, just to see if he was really stalking me. He didn't even try to hide. He stood outside the store just staring in. I got really scared for a second, but then I remembered I'm like the best 007 agent out there, so I just continued walking around the mall. I finally entered the corridors, and at this point I booked it to the staircase. I ran out and then didn't stop running for 2 bus stops. I tried looking back, but there was no one, so I proudly decided that I'm a hero and went home. Today, being a 21-year-old grown-up, I just think about how stupid that is, and how I'd probably be 10 times as scared today than I was back then. Well, I hope it never comes to that.
In January, I went to Washington, D.C. with some very close family friends. Coming from a town of about 11,000 people and never having been to a city even close to D.C. size, I was scared out of my mind that I might get pickpocketed or mugged or something. TV has led me to believe that big cities like this had absolutely packed streets that were difficult to even walk on, resulting in regular occurrences such as these. Needless to say, I was relieved when the trip ended without any such incident. At the DC airport, our 6 a.m. flight was delayed 3 or 4 times due to weather. By the time we finally got to the Denver, Colorado airport, it was around midnight, preventing us from driving the rest of the way home that night as we had originally planned. I refused to pee on airplanes unless absolutely necessary, so when we landed, I had to go. So I, along with my friend's mom who also had to go, went to the restroom. When I came out of the stall, I noticed a security lady was now standing beside the door. I had heard no other footsteps come in the completely empty restroom. My ears were actually quite alert because the empty airport freaked me out. So this confused me a bit, but I just smiled at her and washed my hands. Approximately 10 seconds later, a toilet flushed. Instead of my friend's mom, a creepy-looking man with a black sweatshirt on, hood up, emerged from the stall. At the sight of the airport employee, he lowered his head and quickly walked out of the restroom. She followed him out, saying, "This is clearly marked as a women's restroom." At that time, probably mostly due to sleep deprivation, I didn't think much of it. But the next day it really dawned on me. A man wearing a black sweatshirt with a hood up in a women's restroom, which was marked as such with quite an enormous sign. It's midnight and the airport is practically deserted. Plus, he entered the restroom without a single sound, which for me was the worst part. I don't recall hearing any footsteps or extra sounds of urination or anything like that, so I honestly don't think he even used the restroom at all. Rather, just pretended by flushing the toilet. I repeatedly mentally thanked that security guard for seeing this. I very well could have been kidnapped, murdered, raped, who knows? He easily could have jumped me. I hadn't even looked up until the security guard spoke to him. But the second I did, I got a very creepy vibe from him, and he didn't even really look at me. I never told any of my friends' family, but my mom may have. So that's probably the most frightening thing that's ever happened to my young self. This is not the scariest story, but it definitely creeped me the fuck out. For background, I am a 20-year-old female. I matched with this guy on Tinder a while back. His name was Nick, and he seemed pretty cool. So I gave him my Snapchat. We talked a little, but it died out quickly. I didn't tell him the exact town I lived in, but the city about 10 minutes away because it's decent sized and has a big population of people. And I figured he wouldn't be able to find me just by knowing that bit of information. A few weeks ago, he started messaging me and we made small talk. Everything seemed normal for a while, up until New Year's Eve. The day before, he messaged me saying he was going to be in the area, the city I told him I was from, and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. I told him possibly, and I would let him know. The next night, I had a New Year's Eve party with a small group of my friends. I spent most of the day getting ready and was not looking at my phone. Around 7:30, I finally looked at Snapchat and saw that Nick had not only messaged me, but also called me. "Hey, I'm in." I responded telling him I was sorry. I just saw his message. He opened it within minutes and totally freaked out. He said something along the lines of, "Just to let you know, I'm really not interested in someone who can never even answer the phone when I drove 6 hours just to see her." I looked at it in disbelief, and for a second I thought he was joking. I responded by asking him what he was talking about and that he didn't drive 6 hours just to see me. He said that we had plans, and why else would he have driven up here? I was confused because we never had plans. He told me that he was going to be in the area, which made me think he was here for work or to visit a friend. It is not uncommon for people to travel here for work. I explained this to him and told him that we did not have plans and that I didn't ask him to drive all that way for me. He told me he sat around for 2 hours waiting for me and bought me flowers. Again, I was confused because we never planned a time or place to meet, and he had never confirmed plans. You don't make plans by just telling someone you're going to be in the area. I apologized, but told him again that we never had plans. He told me to make it up to him. I had to drive up and see him tomorrow? Yeah, fuck that. I remembered that I had my location shared on Snapchat, so he could easily have shown up at my house. I turned off my location, but kept him on Snapchat in case he tries to show up at my house. Luckily, I have not heard from him since. My dad is a retired police officer and has a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it. So, Tinder creep who drove 6 hours for me? Let's not meet.
Just a few details before I start. This happened a year ago. I was 18 years old. I moved in with my mom last summer because my parents are annulled, and my dad decided that I should study here because there's this one school here that has a really good reputation when it came to the course I wanted to take up. So I was new to the neighborhood. Right across our house was a computer shop where, lucky for me, had League of Legends installed in most of the computers. I'm pretty addicted, so I spent most of the time there since it was still vacation. I made friends quick because I guess guys here rarely saw a girl who played League. So I got to know 2 guys really well. They were way older than me and treated me like their little sister. They were always with me since they told me that although the dudes here act nice, they end up being jerks once they get used to you. They named a few, and I avoided those few most of the time. So let me get to the story now. A few weeks into summer, our bathroom wasn't working very well, and we only had 1 bathroom in the house. I know, but we're not that rich, and most of the houses here in the Philippines that are owned by average people only have 1 bathroom. Our house has a faucet at the back, and so everyone in the house took a bath there for a week. We had a hard time looking for someone who could fix the bathroom because my mom said that this happened a few years back and that they had it fixed, but the plumber did a sloppy job, and so it happened again. The walls surrounding the back portion of the house are pretty tall, and there was absolutely no way anyone could see us, not unless they were actually standing there with you. And we had put up this curtain thing too, just in case. For that reason, I took a bath there for a week completely naked. In my defense, everyone else was doing it, and I really thought that nobody would see me. I was horrified when I found out I was wrong. A few weeks after our bathroom was fixed, an unknown number texted me asking me where I was. I didn't respond because I figured it must have been sent to me by accident, but a few minutes later, the unknown number called me. I answered it, about to tell whoever it was they got the wrong number, when a very breathy, low voice cut me off. He sounded kinda high and drunk. "Hello, Steph. I texted you. Where are you?" I didn't know what to say. I thought it was one of my friends and that it was a joke. "Steph, why don't you take a bath at back anymore?" And so I freaked the fuck out and ended the call and blocked his number from calling me. He was still able to send me text messages before I was able to figure out how to block him from texting me too. Here are a few of them. "I want to see you taking a bath again, Steph. Can we meet up right now? Please take a bath there again, one last time." There were a few more, but they're really bad and stuff. I told my 2 guy friends about it, and they told me it was probably one of the guys who really likes smoking weed and getting drunk every day that was texting me. I felt horrible. I was so paranoid as to how he was able to see me taking a bath. I mean, how the hell did he even know that I was taking a bath at the back of our house in the first place? We never told anyone. I mean, why would we? Only the family knew that we had to take baths at the back and no one else. And the walls were high up. The neighboring houses weren't 2-story houses, so it's impossible. Maybe there was a hole in the wall, but there weren't any. I checked the walls and there was none. Fortunately, he didn't try contacting me again, but I seriously feel creeped out whenever I'm alone in the living room at night because I feel like someone is staring at me. I keep the curtains closed all the time in my room now. I never found out who it really was, but Mr. Peeping Tom, let's not meet. Ever.
To keep a long story short, my ex-best friend Alyssa and I were friends for almost 7 years. We had a good, healthy relationship. She was my ride or die. We did everything together, but we slowly started to drift away when I exchanged schools. We saw each other after school, so it was cool. Well, a year passed, and I started to notice Alyssa hanging with the wrong crowd, and I didn't want any part of that. I started to notice how Alyssa would pick on me about my appearance and clothing, but she used to dress like me. We used to be dripped in anime merch, but ever since she started to hang out with more mature college people, she changed. She would constantly tell me I'm fat, ugly, or nobody loves me, all that type of stuff. And my last straw was when she called my family poor. I lost it because my family has helped her with financial problems and even gotten them out of debt. So I stopped being friends with her, and I started to hang out with new people and get to know myself more. I have made a new best friend, and everything was great, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from every corner. I always felt like someone was there, but I ignored it. Months passed, and I still can't shake the feeling of being watched, and that's when stuff started to happen. My car would end up keyed. My tires were popped most of the time, and weird letters I had to decipher started to show up in my front porch, but I'm dumb and decided to ignore the problems. A year later, I decided to hang out with some old friends from the group, and that's when I found out everything. Alyssa was the one doing those things to me, and every letter she sent was a death threat. My friend Tori, the one who witnessed everything, told me how Alyssa would stalk me and get mad that I replaced her with a guy. That's not what creeped me out. Turns out, Alyssa copied everything. I got a 2018 Nissan Sentra, and she got the same car. Inside my dashboard on my car, I have My Hero Academia figures and South Park figures, and she went as far as to get the same type of figures online and put them on her dashboard. She would wake up at 6 a.m, drive to my house and wait for me to wake up and get out of the house so she could follow me. She tried adding my friends on social media and tried to convince them to leave me for her because she is a better friend than me. She even got the same clothes as I did. According to Tori, when she would visit Alyssa at her house, Alyssa would have the same anime posters. I didn't believe her at first until she showed me pictures. I wish she sent them to me. Everything was the same, as if Tori was seeing double of everything. Lucky for me, Alyssa was forced to move up north with her father. Her grandma kicked her out the house, and everything went back to normal. For now, I'm just scared when she comes over for holidays and starts to stalk me again.
So, this was something that happened my freshman year of college. Being new to a campus that I didn't have many friends on, I began seeking out some cool people to hang out with as I had long breaks between my classes. I quickly found myself spending time with a large group of girls from my math class. We began spending time in the lounge area of my campus and made some friends through there too. To give an idea, it was a relatively smaller campus with only a few buildings, and the lounge area was quite a small room with some pool tables and seats. As the semester went on, we began making it a regular ordeal to all go to lunch or coffee at least once a week. Our lunch group quickly went from 5 people to nearly 20. Friends started bringing acquaintances and our group grew. One kid named Spencer, who was a friend's friend, joined us regularly for coffee or lunch. One day word got back to me that he was into me and wanted to get my number. I nicely told my friend that I wasn't interested and that I had a boyfriend. A lie. I thought this would deter him as he came off as a non-confrontational person. One morning, a group message was sent out by my friend Trish, who asked if we all wanted to meet up for coffee, and everyone for the most part agreed to meet. I arrive about 10 minutes early to almost everything, so I was used to being the first one there. Spencer arrived shortly after me. He sat down next to me and I exchanged a friendly good morning and a smile. Slowly the time passed and no one else showed up. We sat awkwardly for about 15 minutes and finally he spoke up and said, "This is a surprise date. I planned it." I think it's important to mention I'm pretty hot-headed and I don't like being lied to. I got up from the chair, gathered my things, and left without a word. The next couple of weeks went by without a word from Spencer. I thought that maybe he had gotten the hint that I wasn't interested. Soon, though, he started showing up at the same time that I worked out at the school gym. I didn't think much of it because our schedules were pretty similar, so like myself, I just assumed this was the only time he had to work out. Soon it went from being there at the same time to him following me around the gym. Whatever machine I was using, he was conveniently at the one right next to me, lifting lightweight and staring. I had some friends that worked the front desk of the gym, so I mentioned it to them and they said they'd take care of it if it got out of hand. One day, I was squatting at the gym and mid-rep, he walked up, pulled my headphone out and proceeded to tell me my form was off and grabbed my waist. I racked my bar and turned around angrily telling him, "Don't fucking touch me." He apologized and proceeded to ask me out once again. I told him I wasn't interested and had a boyfriend anyways. I didn't. Once again, a couple weeks went by and the only contact I had with Spencer was sitting at the opposite end of the table during our lunch gatherings. I thought he had finally gotten the hint. Then one day at the gym, I was walking down the hallway to the girls' locker room when he walked up behind me and put both hands on either side of the wall behind my head. He said, "I know you feel the connection. I do. Why don't you let me take you out?" I quickly yelled for my friend Chris, who worked the gym's front desk. Keep in mind, Chris is very large, 6'3", and extremely fit, whereas Spencer is 5'7", and well, wasn't fit. Chris quickly walked around the corner to see what was happening and came running down the hall yelling at Spencer. He was then banned from the gym and not allowed back in. One night I get a text message from a random number stating that it's Spencer and he wanted to apologize for what happened at the gym. I told him what he did wasn't okay and that I wasn't interested in him and I'd like for him to leave me alone from now on. He apologized again, and again I didn't hear anything else. Thinking that was the last time, I blocked his number. All was well until one day when I came home from work to a bouquet of white lilies sitting on my doorstep. Thinking they were from my grandma, she does sweet stuff like this. I got excited, picked them up and took them inside. Then I read the letter. It was unsigned and just said, "I love watching you." I frantically started calling and texting friends thinking this was a sick joke as they knew about how creepy Spencer had been. I got concerned answers and honest no's from every single one. I panicked, threw the flowers out, and made sure to lock my door. Later that night, I get a text from a random number that said, "You didn't enjoy your flowers? I saw you throw them away." At this point, I had had enough. I called the number, and the familiar voice of Spencer was on the other line. I lost my shit quite literally. I didn't even let him get past his sickening hello before I started screaming at him. He then calmly stated if I wanted to talk to him, to come outside. I looked out my window and there he was, standing right in front of my house, smiling. I called the cops and when they showed up, they detained him and I got a restraining order placed on him. The cops then contacted me a couple days later to let me know he has more than one restraining order placed for the same behavior. 10, including mine to be exact. I had late classes the semester after this and called campus police to walk me to my car every night after this because I was terrified he would show up again. Shortly after that, I moved about 300 miles away and luckily have never seen him again other than his every so often random Instagram follow request. So Spencer, let's not ever meet again.
This story took place in 2012. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 hours away from my parents in order to go to college. Within the first few weeks of being there, a random guy stopped me on campus and asked me out. I'm a very shy and very introverted person. This had never happened to me before. I said yes. We exchanged phone numbers and we went our separate ways. At the time, I didn't have a cell phone. I only had a Skype number, so I made sure to explain that to him. However, he would still call me all day long while I was at school, and it honestly kind of put me off. Several days later, I decided I needed to run some errands. I walked to Walmart, bought what I needed, and started walking back. It started to rain, and I thought, wow, it's just going to be one of those days, huh? About a mile into my walk home, a car slowed down beside me. Well, it was the dude. He asked if I wanted a ride. I was naive, sore, and tired, and I gave in. I got into the car without even thinking of the possible consequences. He made a big deal about how he wasn't from that part of town, and how lucky I was that he ran into me while he happened to be doing errands there. He drove me to my place, and he asked if I wanted to go to lunch and a movie with him after I put up my stuff. I said sure, why not? He really did seem friendly, and I didn't really think much of it at the time. Once I got back in the car, however, things started to get weird. He asked me if I like seafood, and I said no. I really dislike seafood. He then said,
"Well, that doesn't matter. I'm taking you to a nice seafood place. I'm sure they'll have something you can manage to like."
Now, for me, this was red flag number 1. Why ask and then dismiss the response? Why say that my opinion doesn't matter? However, I come from a very narcissistic home, so I thought that maybe I was just reading too much into it. He then started asking me questions about my major, my friends, my hobbies, all the normal stuff. Once we got to the restaurant and began to sit down, he gave me the weirdest look and started asking if anything that I said was true. What?
"Are these people you're talking about real? Do they actually exist?"
Yeah, they're real people in my class."
"I don't believe you. These people don't sound real."
I'm a little taken aback by this. I don't know what's not to believe. They were very normal people. It really weirded me out to be outright accused of making up my friends like that. He went on to accuse me of lying about every little detail about my life. Still, little old southern polite me kept a straight face and got through lunch. It was just really bizarre. We went to the movie and he kept trying to touch me the entire time. I was already so put off from the earlier things that I didn't reciprocate. He got really agitated by this and brought it up once we were out in the car, about how he expected me to be more friendly. Yeah, no, I'm not that kind of girl. He takes me home, and I was glad to finally have that date behind me now. I thought it was over. I refused to return his calls and I began avoiding him at school. Everything is done, right? No, of course not. He started showing up to my apartment daily at 8:30 on the dot to bang on my front door for literally 30 minutes straight. I mean, he wouldn't even take a single minute break. If I answered, he would ask if I wanted to go to lunch later in the day with him. I always told him I was busy, but if I didn't answer, he would just keep knocking. At the time, I didn't have a car, and I literally walked everywhere that I went. I started noticing him driving past me several times when I'd walk to places. He kept offering me rides, to which I'd always say no thank you. He also kept calling me every day. This went on for about 2 months. All in all, I'd say I'm pretty lucky that it never really escalated anything beyond this, and that it finally stopped after the 2 months. However, it was really creepy at the time.
One night in November of 2017, when I was 22 years old, my mom and I went grocery shopping. While standing in the bakery section, my mom and I ran into my aunt, and the three of us stood there and chit-chatted for a while. I had been feeling generally uneasy around this time because I'd been recently binge-watching a lot of YouTube videos about true crime and creepy encounters. Shout out to Criminally Listed and Mr. Nightmare. I was having trouble sleeping, and I had been getting scared when I was home alone and heard the tiniest noises. Due to this uneasiness, or paranoia, I guess, I was very alert and on edge in the bakery at my grocery store. I stood with my back to the bagels and kept an eye on everyone walking past us as my mom and aunt shared stories. Nobody seemed suspicious, until I caught the eye of a prematurely balding man. He looked like your average mid-30s, brawny, neckbeard, nice guy. I remember thinking to myself, God, he's kind of creepy looking, isn't he? As he walked through the produce section into the bakery. But then I started to feel bad. Chill out. You're being way too judgmental, I told myself, going so far as to even smile at him out of sheer guilt. He's probably staring at you because you're staring at him. He's just glancing on his way by. He's going to forget about you the second he takes his eyes off you, right? Wrong. I completely forgot about this experience for a few blissfully ignorant months. Then in January, I received a messenger request from an old friend I'd lost touch with. My long-lost friend was the first of many to reach out, saying that there was a lot of buzz on Facebook about a local sex offender who had been taking pictures of young women with hair he deemed pretty, some in their 20s like me, some well below the age of 18, and posting them on a picture sharing site. I don't know exactly how, but his online albums stocked with, and I am not exaggerating, thousands of these pictures had been found, and a bunch of screenshots were being plastered all over Facebook to raise awareness. My old friend saw a few pictures of me standing against the bagels, flanked by my mother and my aunt, my long hair hanging down in the post-French braid waves. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the screenshots. I told my family about what I'd just found out, and my brother immediately called the police to report it. As he was talking to an officer, I received more screenshots, this time of the creep's sex offender registry page. He was the man from the grocery store, the man I was initially unnerved by, the man I felt guilty about, the man I smiled at. When my brother got off the phone with the police, he told us that they had been flooded with reports all night. While sympathetic, the policeman my brother spoke to said there was nothing they could do as the creep was legally within his rights to take those pictures of us out in public. The man was allegedly assaulted outside of a convenience store the night his pictures were discovered, before he even realized he had been exposed, and he has since been arrested for possession of child porn in an unrelated case. Fun fact, my brother had actually been aware of this guy long before, as he was apparently infamous on the net for being a sketchy white dude who was obsessed with Asian women, had a hair fetish, and oh, yeah, was a convicted sex offender. So, as they say, creepy photographer, let's not meet.
Hey everyone. So, I'm a guy from the UK. I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages most people imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everyone some context. I did actually post this story on a separate Reddit account several years ago, in a different subreddit. However, I highly exaggerated it for the sake of story. And this was a creative writing subreddit, I believe. I can't fully remember. I just remember the story I told wasn't totally honest. So, if you think you've read something similar before, then you probably have. This is the full truth of what happened, and is likely way less exciting than the original story, but oh well. So it started when I was around 15 years old, so about 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back. However, this one night, her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 19-20 and was pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mother, and the whole thing got kind of heated and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay over. It was about 2 a.m, and I didn't want to call my own parents in worry of waking them up. My mother is a very strict woman. So I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home by around 4:30. So I walked along the weird concrete bit just above the beach, not sure what it's called, and I stopped after about half an hour of walking, as there is a public toilet which is kind of run down, but also open 24 hours, and I was desperate. I was expecting it to be empty, or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it. But I was wrong. There was a guy using the urinal. This guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s maybe. A little on the overweight side, but not extremely. He had grey, messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember he made a quick joke about something, but I don't remember what. I politely laughed, did my business, and left. After about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. Started to rain heavy, and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember this was around November time, so it was pretty cold. Anyways, so I'm walking, and a car drives by, beeps, and pulls over just in front of me. I had assumed it was someone I know, but couldn't think who. Got to the car, and the dude from the toilet was inside. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him. He said that was a long walk, and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, and he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was bad, and at the time he wasn't giving off any weird vibes. The drive took about 15 minutes, I think, maybe 20. The more I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off about this guy. He was telling me his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot, and they drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask to someone that you're giving a simple lift home to. Anyways, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I told him my house wasn't accessible by road and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to ring him when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I got home okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point he knew my full name, and he just said, Pete. I said, Pete what? My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me, just kept saying, just call me Pete. I later found out that Pete was a fake name too. Anyway, I got into my house and texted him, just to let him know I was home safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then I was full of bad decisions, to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. Started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me well. I replied to the first few, and then started ignoring them. He then started trying to ring me every single evening. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly ring until I answer. He was sending me these texts, inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he'd just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story of a friend he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old I was talking about, and accidentally let slip that the guy called him John. I collared him about this, said, I thought your name was Pete. He said, oh no, my friend's name is John. I said, you just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom. He said, oh, well, some people call me John. It's like a nickname, but his name is John too. He hesitated saying this, and I kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing, but he kept asking. After a while, my mum wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she rang him herself from her phone and told him that if he carried on texting and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew it. I always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon and played with her for 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, just near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were always left on, and the engine was always running. Also, I recognized his car. I would occasionally notice the car door open and a large flash from that direction, as if someone was taking pictures. I started changing the time I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either earlier or late to coincide with when I was walking her. This went on for months, and I never mentioned it to anyone, but one day, it just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. I never saw his car anymore, not text messages or phone calls from him. It all just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year, and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18-19 after the aforementioned dog died. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone, and wanted to transfer them over to my PC so that I always had them. I turned on a phone which had been turned off for several years now, and still had the old SIM in it. That's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an odd one, and was about 14 months old. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over New Year I was diagnosed with an illness, and I've been told I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at," sent me his address, "and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so I can have a last chat with you. I've got some beers in, and if it gets too late you can stay the night. Just drop me a phone call when you want to come around so that I can get everything ready for you. See you soon." No idea if Pete/John was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. Never been to the address he sent me, and never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him, and that was the last I heard from the guy. So yeah, that's the story. Not tremendously exciting, but kind of had a big impact on me during those years. Hope you all enjoyed. I used to work in an industrial area that tends to be secluded and dark at night, with minimal lighting along the roads. I also live close to this previous job, so I would walk home instead of taking the bus. I can't drive. The bus routes tend to be awkward and have long wait times, so I usually walk. One night, in early October, I had been walking through a parking lot to get to my place. I had to walk through a few parking lots to get to my place. However, the parking lots close to the main road were where these incidents occurred. Anyway, as I am walking through a desolate parking lot, I am listening to music and enjoying my walk when I get this suspicious feeling that I should look behind me. I look behind and see this individual wearing a hoodie/track pants and appears to be maybe a woman. This person is pale and seems to be watching me after emerging from the bushes/trees she was hiding in. She picks up pace from behind me, but continues walking horizontal to me. I ran across the main road, and when I looked back, I could see her standing next to a set of trees. She then realizes that I see her watching me and jumps behind a tree to hide. I go into some random apartments to hide from her and wait there for some time. I then left and went to my place. I told my mum about this incident and she said that I should have called the police. Now it doesn't stop there. So, now it's early November. I have a weird feeling that there is someone in this parking lot I am walking through. I was walking through a different parking lot this time, as the previous parking lot had freaked me out because someone was watching me. As I am walking through this parking lot, the person wearing a hoodie emerges from hiding behind a parked trailer, talking on her phone. I am now thoroughly freaked out and decides to pick up my pace and get to the main road as fast as possible without alerting this person that I feel threatened by them. As I am getting ready to cross the road, this person decides to cross the road as well and watches me as I cross the road. I book it to the random apartment and hide in there until I assume she is gone. Now, the last time this happened was mid-November, a week after the second incident. I am walking through the same parking lot that I saw her in the second time. Dumb, I know. This time, she emerges from hiding behind a trailer and starts walking towards me. I decide to just run and get to the main road. I get across the main road and look back, and she is gone. I assume she must have been hiding behind the trailer, as there was no way she could have gotten out of the parking lot in that time. I decide to hide in the same apartment building as well. Now I have not seen her, as it has been snowing, so it would be significantly easier to see her face, and it's too cold to wait out in a parking lot. I also no longer work there, so I no longer have to take that route to work. Now, it could have been a man, as they were pretty tall, but I thought I heard her voice when she was talking on her phone, and when I saw her the first time, I thought she might have been a white female with dark hair. I have not gone to the police with this information, but might. I doubt it will do anything, but my mum thinks it might. So, I'm a 22F, and I just moved into this apartment complex in the heart of downtown Baltimore. Tonight was my second night living here, and I went to do the laundry that was on the lower level of the complex, kind of like the basement, and decided to use the gym that was also on the lower level, while I wait for my clothes to get washed. So, I'm in the gym, working out, and it's a small room with not much equipment. I was the only one in there, and I see this guy in the hallway outside, looking at me. I ignored him, and continued working out, until he came into the gym and gave me a thumbs up and said, "Good job." I smiled and said, "Thank you." He then comes into the gym and starts the treadmill, and I didn't want to be confined in a small space with this guy, so I went to the laundry room and my washer was almost finished. So I waited and texted on my phone, and a few minutes later, that same guy came in and he went to do his load. We were the only ones in there. And then he came up to me and showed me his phone, and it was on Google Translate and it read, "You are beautiful." I said thank you, and he continued to translate for me to read. He's from Saudi Arabia and he barely spoke any English. And he was asking if he wanted to be my friend. I have a hard time saying no, so I just shrugged and said okay. And he asked, via Google Translate, for my number. I gave him a fake, and he called it right in front of me, and of course my phone didn't ring. He continued to call, and still nothing. He told me to wait there, and ran back to the elevators. I started to get a bad feeling, so I left the laundry room. I waited on the other side of the hallway, passed the elevators, and turned the corner, where he wouldn't see me, and texted my boyfriend what was happening. The elevator door then opened, and the man comes out, and I heard him go into the laundry. I had this gut feeling telling me to run, and I'm never a frantic person or anything, and I don't get spooked that easily, but I just had a really bad feeling. I pressed the exit button to unlock the door that leads to the outside, and it wasn't budging. I turned around and saw him head into the gym from the mirror on the wall, and knew he was going to check this side next, so I kept frantically pushing the button, and the doors unlocked and I ran outside. I walked around for 10 minutes on the phone with my boyfriend, telling him what had happened, and went to the lobby of my complex and asked the front desk lady if she could escort me to the laundry room. She said yes, and we went. The man wasn't there, and I put my clothes in the dryer, and she told me to come back and get her when the dryer was done. 45 minutes later, the front desk lady and I went to the laundry room, and guess who was in there? The man. He smiled and was about to say something until he saw who I was with and became quiet. I got my clothes and we left, and the guy left with us too. We all got in the elevator with the lady in between us, and her and I got off on the lobby floor so she could show me where the other laundry rooms were on the other side of the complex. I thanked her and went on my way. I waited for the elevator to come down, and when it did and the doors opened, that man came off and held the door open for me. I said no and told him I would wait for the next one. I didn't want him knowing which floor I lived on. He got off and was pacing back and forth and huffing and puffing. As soon as the next elevator opened, I got on and he tried to get on with me. I immediately got off and he was like, come inside, and I said no, and he started to get really mad and started to walk towards me. I booked it back to the lobby, and to my luck, the front desk lady was already heading my way, telling me she saw what happened on the security camera. She escorted me to my room and made sure I got in safely. I'm so thankful that she was there, and this probably wouldn't have happened if I just cut the conversation short with that man. I have never been this freaked out before, and have never felt this unsafe either. Even though he didn't necessarily do anything wrong, it was just the vibe I got off from him. I'm going to use the laundry room on the other side of the complex, just so I can lessen the chance having to ever run into that man again.